We're only getting bits and pieces of what actual context was during the time of the process of the making out of the contract. Kyler Murray did take a stand. He did get up, and then obviously the Cardinals released a statement saying after seeing the distraction it created, they removed the addendum from the contract. The Cardinals said in a statement late Thursday, according to Rappaport and ESPN's Adam Schefter, it was clearly perceived in ways that were never intended. Of course it was. You just told us that your guy doesn't study. Yet he's supposed to lead DeAndre Hopkins and Hollywood Brown and the Cardinals offense to a championship. Now, right before training camp happens, right before the preseason, right before the season actually goes off, you have now created a considerate distraction from your team. And then Kyler Murray gets up and says to think that, how hard it is to play this game, that people would think he wouldn't put in the effort and the time. That's crazy. And that's understandable. But at some point along the way, we got mixed up because a clause was put in that you needed to study. Deebo Samuel. He just inked his deal as well. 4 years, $138 million by the San Francisco 49ers. I'm sorry, I'm going to do that part over again. It's okay. Deebo Samuel, wide receiver for the 49ers, just inked his massive deal. And the 49ers asked him something of which he did last year, but very interesting. Now, for those of you who watch 49ers game, that you know, not only was Deebo a stud receiver, but he also had a good amount of carries coming out of the backfield, basically playing at a running back position, playing the flex position. And obviously that led the 49ers to an NFC championship en route of beating the Cowboys at home, en route of beating the Green Bay Packers at home. Now, obviously, Trey Lance is here. They needed to get a guy in, especially because they signed a three-year deal. So Trey Lance will be able to have the opportunity to be comfortable. But is Deebo actually comfortable? The guy that you actually signed. And his clause drops a major hint as far as what his role with the 49ers will be, which will still be playing receiver with some running back still mixed in. Deebo has incentives if he rushes over 300 yards. Now, obviously, that was a problem for Deebo last year because he wasn't in love with how he was being utilized. That might remind you of another receiver down in Miami, where the Dolphins do Dolphins things. Wasn't a big fan of how he was utilized in Kansas City, that being one Tyreek Hill. And this story is a little funny because it even goes back to a couple of months ago. I want to say back in April, where Deebo wanted to announce, he wanted to be traded. And for one, he was not signed. And for two, the 49ers will not commit to utilizing him in a much better way. Now, contracts are all about compromising, which is cool. We get that. But in terms of the player, in which every time these contracts usually come out, we believe, and I think that's one of them issues that Mr. Key has in the back. We believe that the players have the leg up in negotiations and deals, and then they slap all this guaranteed money in front of them, and then they make us believe that the player is set, they're good to go, and the whole time, they're not. Now, Samuel has worked his way up. Obviously, he was a slow starter. He put up 802 yards in the 19 debut season, in his debut season. Then he had various injuries in 2020, managed to bounce back, and he's had over 2,000 yards combined through the air and ground this past season. Now, for his incentives as far as his contract, per source with the knowledge of the deal, Samuel gets $650,000 for each year in which he rushes for 380 yards. If he doesn't get to the 380-yard mark but scores 3 touchdowns, he gets $150 instead. But the cap on total incentives each year is 650. In other words, if he rushes for 380 yards and scores 3 rushing touchdowns, he still gets the 650,000, not 650 plus the 150. Samuel can earn either incentive 3 times in the 4 years of his contract, capping the total incentives to $195 million. Now, Fern, you might be hearing that. You might say, "Oh, that's not bad. It's not bad." But the first position that Deebo Samuel plays is wide receiver. His incentives contract asks him to be a running back. Now, I guess in this sense, Samuel has the option to say he does or does not want to meet that incentive. But obviously, if it's in his contract, he's going to try to do that. But we see where the power of the clause, puts you in a binding agreement with said organization that you may or may not like. I can't say that Deebo is totally fine with this contract, especially given that you didn't want to really be utilized this way, though the 49ers and yourself had success when utilizing you out of the backfield. Clause makes people have to do things that they just don't want to do. I can't call it strange, but it sure does put strange wording out there. Look at Zion. Look at Kyler Murray. When we return here, is Draymond Green worth the max? I like a defensive-minded guy, but I tell you why he's not worth it. Then we'll get into some Deshaun Watson talk. Or am I a fan of 6-game suspension? No. No one is. And I'll explain more of that later on here on the Monk Spot Podcast on KEI TV. We'll return in a moment.
Actually, that's spot on. Spot on.
Everything is spot on.
Actually, that's spot on. Spot on. Actually, that's spot on. Spot on.
Everything is spot on.
Actually, that's spot on. Spot on. Actually, that's spot on. Spot on.
Everything is spot on.
Actually, that's spot on. Spot on. Actually, that's spot on. Spot on.
Everything is spot on.
Actually, that's spot on. Spot on. Actually, that's spot on. Spot on.
Everything is spot on.
Actually, that's spot on. Spot on. Actually, that's spot on. Spot on.
Everything is spot on.
Actually, that's spot on. Spot on. Actually, that's spot on. Spot on.
Everything is spot on.
Actually, that's spot on. Spot on.
It's spot on.
Actually, that's spot on.
Spot on. That's a part of KKEI TV. Mr. Key is going to kill me for that, but that's okay because I'll come back around to it later. Draymond Green and the Golden State Warriors and the massive problem that they're kind of going to have at some point. Maybe not. But why so much hate for my guy, 2023? I don't understand it. I love Draymond. I think he's the heart and soul of the Golden State Warriors, and the big looming question around him now is this guy worth the max contract, and why is it so much of a tough decision to come to terms with a 32-year-old big man getting paid the max at this stage in the game? Now, here are the things that we know about Draymond Green, and then I'll get all analytical and stuff in just a bit. I said it earlier. He's the heart and soul of the Warriors. He's easily a top 10 defensive player of the league. And if he not missed 46 games last year, he'd still probably be up for the Defensive MVP award. Now, should he get the max contract? The answer is no. And I just said I love Draymond. Oh, my God, you just said all this about Draymond, and then all of a sudden he can't. Yes, that's true. But why? Is it because of the injuries? Is it because he's in the shadow of the Splash Brothers and Steph Curry and Klay Thompson? Is it just because you're a big man and I'm just not about to give you what could be the maximum of 4 years, $138 million at this stage in your career? All three of those answers are true. In theory and opinion. Because a lot of people would say no. Diehard Warriors fans may say yes. Smart Warriors fans may say no because they know the value in which he has is secondary to the first tier value that's brought and pushed forward by Steph and Klay. Without them, the Warriors don't survive with just Draymond on the court. But there have been times where without Draymond, the Warriors have not been as dominant. They have not been as physical. They have not been as confident. Draymond has brought all of these things and then some to the Warriors. But why doesn't the maximum contract fit in? Both sides are not on the same page. Draymond is interested and willing to explore his options outside of what the Warriors could give him if this does not work out. But how good is Draymond Green? Now, we got an article coming from Sporting News on if he is worth this max contract. And it does state on how great he is. Since being selected with the 35th pick in a 2012 NBA draft, Green has racked up 4 All-Star selections, 2 All-NBA selections, 1 Defensive Player of the Year award, and 7 All-Defensive selections. Sounds like a lot of All-Defensive selections. Only 18 players in NBA history have earned more. That list includes the likes of Tim Duncan, Kevin Garnett, Michael Jordan, and Dennis Rodman. And even though this defensive, the statistics don't give him actual justice, he's still one of the smartest and most impactful players on the court. Now, there's obviously a graph on here, and you guys can come read it on your own in your own time about his, again, the article being if Draymond is worth the extension on sportingnews.com. But it gives a nice offensive graph of his impact throughout the years. Green's impact on offense is harder to quantify. He's averaged only 7.4 points per game since the 18-19 season, and him knocking down 38% of his three-point attempts in 2015 and 16 has proven to be an outlier because that was so long ago. Green is offensively a liability. And we want to mask over, we being I, mask over his offensive deficiencies with his defensive efficiencies. efficiencies, whichever one you would like to call it. Now, the biggest problem that the Warriors are looking at is Draymond has this uncanny ability to turn up his play at any point in time. There's only one other guy I know that can do that. Now, a bunch of other players can do that, but I've seen it in Draymond because I watch him. Shout out my guy John with the eye test. The playoffs. The things that Green does not do shows up in the box score. Game 2 of the 22 NBA Finals being a great example. While stands for anything to write home about, his fingerprints were all over the game. Defensive stops, rebounds. Now, we'll look on the stat sheet and we'll look at points per game because that's the only thing we're so concerned about, which is where Steph and Klay's name shows up. But for everyone else, we overlook what Draymond does. Now, Green signed a 4-year, $100 million extension with the Warriors ahead of the 2019-2020 season. He's on the books for $25.8 million in 2022 and 23, and he has a player option for $27 million in 23 and 24. That means he could be an unrestricted free agent after the upcoming season. Now, is he worth this much money at 32 years old? Bando, if I gave you $130 million at 32, and you've been producing for only 4 years right now, but if I gave you that much money, you probably wouldn't. No, you think you deserved it at 32. Anybody would do that. but you see what I'm saying? This is basketball. Not like us. We're just two guys sitting here talking about what other players should and shouldn't make and should and shouldn't do in the game of sports. But the Warriors, if they are smart, you realize it is probably about the time to get ready to part ways from your trio of greatness. You have 4 championships with this core. I know you want to go for 5, and this could be your opportunity to get 5 this year. The team looks really good. They just need to get some depth in place, and then other than that, they're going to be okay. But you go 3 guys, one, which is definitely coming off a horrendous injury, and thank God for Klay Thompson that he was able to make it back. He's a champion now, and it's such a really great success story to see a guy coming off an injury in which he had to. And you don't want to look at this situation and say, well, that leaves Draymond out of the water. Yeah, because he's not the flashy guy. He's not the one that's going to give you 30 points a game. He shoots like he's wearing a backpack. So, longevity here. And you can make comparisons to guys like Metta World, Dennis Allen, Ben Wallace, guys that jump back up and maybe did something in a couple of seasons post-injury. Draymond was one of those guys too, which is why it makes the harder case for what the Warriors are actually going to do when it comes time to sign Draymond Green. I don't think he's worth that. Warriors have to make the hard decision, become the man in the mirror, and get ready to move on from what has been an awesome decade of Warriors basketball. Change comes. This is your first test. Can you walk away from Draymond Green? The answer has to be yes. Vice versa for Draymond. Can you walk away from the Warriors? Of course, you want to be tied to your buddies. You get to win more championships. But for the Warriors, get ready to move on. Coming up next on the Monk Spot Podcast as a part of KEI TV, Deshaun Watson suspension. Woo! It's a tender subject. But we're gonna have to grill this meat. Then we got some Cowboys talk coming up later on. This is Tony Monk, Monk Spot Podcast on KEI TV. We'll be back in a moment.
Actually, that's spot on. Spot on.
Everything is spot on.
Actually, that's spot on.
Spot on.
Actually, that's spot on. Spot on.
Everything is spot on.
Actually, that's spot on. Spot on. Actually, that's spot on. Spot on.
Everything is spot on.
Actually, that's spot on. Spot on. Actually, that's spot on. Spot on.
Everything is spot on.
Actually, that's spot on. Spot on. Actually, that's spot on. Spot on.
Everything is spot on.
Actually, that's spot on. Spot on. Actually, that's spot on. Spot on.
Everything is spot on.
Actually, that's spot on. Spot on. Actually, that's spot on. Spot on.
Everything is spot on.
Actually, that's spot on. Spot on. Actually, that's spot on. Spot on.
Everything is spot on.
Actually, that's spot on. Spot on. Actually, that's spot on. Spot on.
Everything is spot on.
Actually, that's spot on. Spot on. Actually, that's spot on. Spot on.
Everything is spot on.
Actually, that's spot on. Spot on. Actually, that's spot on. Spot on.
Everything is spot on.
Actually, that's spot on. Spot on. Actually, that's spot on. Spot on.
Everything is spot on.
Actually, that's spot on. Spot on.
Tony Monk coming back at you on a Tuesday, 4 o'clock p.m. It's hot. Dallas, I hope y'all are staying cool out there. I tell you who's not cool at the moment, Deshaun Watson, and what's been happening with his sexual assault case. It has been ruled today that he will serve a 6-game suspension. And nobody's happy about it. Not the league. Not Mr. Key in the back. Even though the league probably don't. Mr. Key, the league don't care what you think, sir. I'm sorry. And certainly not the women who have become victims and what seemingly has been time after time after time with no justice in sight. And I'm not even going to touch on this the Brittany Griner situation. Thankfully, she's going to be freed soon. But, you know, the massive amount of time it took for that to happen was egregious. Just as egregious as this act of Deshaun Watson seemingly forcing himself, whether it be through consent or whatever, on said massage therapists. These 24 women. 24. Well, yeah, 25. I'm sorry. Thank you, Bando, for that. But there was a 16-page report from retired federal judge Sue L. Robinson on why there was a 6-game suspension. So now the case of our little segment here is going to be why the NFL actually shot themselves in the foot. Now, I, for one, think Deshaun should be suspended for a year. Roger Goodell in the NFL is in the same boat. He should be suspended for a year. The problem is there have been similar cases with harassment to a woman in which no player outside of Ray Rice and the additional footage that was leaked after Roger Goodell gave him a 2-game suspension, no player has gotten a year or anything over 6 games for misconduct towards women. Now, there was an arbitrator in this civil case. Now, those of you Dallas people who are listening to this show right now should be familiar with what an arbitrator is. That is a person, the middleman between the league and who they've hired on, between them and the PA, to come in and serve as a judge and jury for said player. Now, looking at a story from ESPN by Dan Graziano. Fundamentally, the NFL won its case against Watson. Robinson found Watson guilty of violating the league's personal conduct policy in 3 ways: by engaging in sexual assault, by engaging in conduct that poses a genuine danger to the safety and well-being of another person, and by engaging in conduct that undermines and puts the risk of integrity of the NFL. Now, I will go ahead and speak once for the Shield, once, and say, obviously, this isn't the NFL's bottom line. They've been under enough scrutiny already for things in the past, whether dealing with women, whether dealing with racial injustice, which they have not handled well. And now they're here to try to right their wrongs with the Deshaun Watson situation. Again, the problem is former cases have came back to bite them in the butt in which they mishandled. I go on. The league does have the right to appeal the determination of discipline with Commissioner Roger Goodell or his designee serving as appeals officer. According to the CBA, any appeal either from the NFL Players Association or the league shall be in writing within 3 business days of the disciplinary officer's decision, and any response to the appeal shall be filled in writing within the 2 business days thereafter. Now, this is the league's new process with trying to involve an arbitrator within what their CBA states. Now, it did a little bit of what it was meant to do. The process went through. Watson was indicted, right? He has a suspension that is to be served. The problem is, out of the 24, now 25, Vando, civil lawsuits filed against Watson, they only brought 4 to the case. Now, the NFL's investigators did not have a subpoena power and thus cannot be compelled all 24 women to talk to them. They interviewed 12, and of those 12, they decided 4 would form the basis of an argument Watson violated personal conduct policy. Now it's unclear why they only used 4, but that's what they apparently decided was the best way to make their case. Now, Robinson found Watson guilty of violating the personal conduct policy. Watson's actions fell under the same umbrella as Deflategate and Bountygate. Watson identified himself as an NFL player when reaching out to therapists and questions. Robinson found credible in the NFL's evidence that his actions were detrimental to the league. Win for the NFL. This is not what you guys represent. This is him making his own decision as said player to mutilate these women. Or so he chose to do. Now, obviously, if the NFL had its way, he'd be suspended for the year, which I fully expect, if not by the end of this day or tomorrow, that the NFL will indeed file an appeal. That's going to happen. Now, the Ray Rice case, for those of you who don't know, in the citing of 2014 case of former Baltimore Ravens running back Ray Rice, Robinson notes the NFLPA's characterization of what happened, specifically that Goodell suspended Rice for 2 games, as was the standard for Rice's offense at the time, and only after public outcry revised his personal conduct policy to establish a 6-game suspension as standard for first-time violent offenders. Did you guys see what Ray Rice did to that woman? He knocked the code out and beat the living daylights out of her. Harassment, against policy conduct. Worst of all, you're beating on the women on in 480p, because that's what it was kind of called in at that time. Now, the word violent plays a key role. As stated by Graziano, the post-Rice personal conduct policy specifies the 6-game suspension for policy violations, including criminal assault or battery, that's a felony, domestic violence, dating violence, child abuse, and other forms of family violence. 3, sexual assault involving physical force or committed against someone incapable of giving consent. There are very specific types of violation, and Robinson states on page 13 of the 16-page paper that was released. I had to say paper because I almost had a brain freeze there. It is undisputed that Mr. Watson's conduct does not fall into the category of violent conduct that would require a minimum 6-day suspension. Robinson strove for consistency where the NFL argued there was none. Basically, Robinson is saying something akin to, you want to argue that this behavior deserves a more severe penalty, fine. Maybe you're right, but that's not in your policy. You can't just make policy to support one specific case as it's going on. If the league wants to do that, do what it did post-Rice and adjust its policy to account for the type of behavior Watson is inherently found guilty, it should do that, then everyone would know. That is where the NFL loses at. You put Ray Rice's suspension at 6 games. Not having your paperwork in order, you tried to argue a policy that was not actually in your policy conduct. This 6-game duration was not random. She notes that the league could have placed Watson on the commissioner's exempt list last year and chose not to, which she appears to think means the league didn't consider his behavior worthy of such punishment until they saw the public reaction to it. I believe Deshaun Watson not playing did kind of make the league say we're not going to deal with him right now until he actively tries to step on the field, which is why I knew a later suspension was coming. Everyone did. But the league isn't going to worry about a player that didn't want to play because he was actually trying to leave the Texans in the first place. Robinson writes that she set it on 6 games because it is the largest suspension ever imposed for nonviolent sexual conduct, but that Watson's behavior is more egregious than the behavior that led to previous suspensions for nonviolent sexual conduct. What he did was not greater than what Ray Rice did, is what they're saying. But what he did grants him the 6-game suspension because the NFL did not properly place context in their policy. So you don't go to court and argue something that's not in writing. You can't do that. Now, how the NFL is going to appeal that, I'm not sure. Funny part, laugh with me on this, guys, because we need a funny part to end this, is that Watson's massage therapy must be coordinated by the team for as long as he is an NFL player. Robinson states that Watson, as a condition for his reinstatement into the league after his 6-game suspension is complete, must limit his massage therapy to club-directed sessions and club-approved massage therapists for the duration of his career. Which means they're going to get him this big buff dude with scaly brass hands, and now that's who has to massage Deshaun Watson because he can't get women anymore. Now, they say that he needs to speak to his team about why all of these things are happening. I'm sure that's going to be super weird. I hope it's very weird because that's very weird for Deshaun Watson to do what he did. Straight up. We return here on Spot on Sports. We will be joined by my guy, Jonathan Davis, formerly of Caesar's Corner, now of Locked On Podcast with Texas Longhorns. But he'll be coming on to give us some baseball trade talk, and we'll talk a little Cowboys. Not Spot on Sports. Tony Monk, Must Spot Podcast on KAI TV. We'll return in a moment.
Actually, that's spot on. Spot on.
Everything is spot on.
Actually, that's spot on. Spot on. Actually, that's spot on. Spot on.
Everything is spot on.
Actually, that's spot on. Spot on. Actually, that's spot on. Spot on.
Everything is spot on.
Actually, that's spot on. Spot on. Actually, that's spot on. Spot on.
Everything is spot on.
Actually, that's spot on. Spot on. Actually, that's spot on. Spot on.
Everything is spot on.
Actually, that's spot on. Spot on. Actually, that's spot on. Spot on.
Everything is spot on.
Actually, that's spot on. Spot on. Actually, that's spot on. Spot on.
Everything is spot on.
Actually, that's spot on. Spot on. Actually, that's spot on. Spot on.
Everything is spot on.
Actually, that's spot on. Spot on. Actually, that's spot on. Spot on.
Everything is spot on.
Actually, that's spot on. Spot on. Actually, that's spot on.
It is spot on.
Actually, that's spot on.
It is spot on.
Everything is spot on.
Actually, that's spot on.
It is spot on.
Actually, that's spot on.
It is spot on.
Everything is spot on.
Actually, that's spot on.
It is spot on.
Actually, that's spot on.
It is spot on.
Everything is spot on.
Actually, that's spot on.
It is spot on.
Actually, that's spot on.
It is spot on.
Everything is spot on.
Actually, that's spot on.
It is spot on.
Actually, that's spot on.
It is spot on.
Everything is spot on.
Actually, that's spot on.
It is spot on.
Tony Monk returning, Monk Spot Podcast on KEI TV, which is your TV all the time. Joined right now by a good friend of mine, one of the best minds in sports, up and coming. I can listen to this guy all day. Jonathan Davis, formerly of Caesars Corner, now locked on Longhorns. How's it going, my guy?
It's going well, man. Excited for Texas football, excited for Cowboys football, excited for football, period. It's going really well. Like you said, Locked On Longhorns on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast.
Love it, love it. And you know, we ain't going to get into the Longhorns today. We're going to come back around on that, John, because I got to get your 2 cents. Obviously, Quinn Ewers, Arch Manning. Where can I start? Because it's Sark After Dark, man. And you know what time it is. But right now is MLB time, or in at least in the sense of trades. Tell me, you've been tuned into the news all day, man. Give me your 2 cents on these trades.
Yeah, so definitely, obviously, if you're talking about, the baseball trades in 2022, it starts and ends with Juan Soto. One of the best young players in baseball, a generational talent, was traded from the Washington Nationals to the San Diego Padres, and a lot of people were confused on the situation why Washington would trade a player of his caliber, why a player of Juan Soto's caliber would turn down 15 years, $440 million. Just really an unprecedented trade and one of the biggest packages we've ever seen for a 23-year-old superstar who is on the track to having a Hall of Fame career. So definitely a trade today that went down that surprised a lot of people. I think a lot of people probably thought that he eventually wouldn't get traded. They would come to a solution. But yes, one of the best young players in baseball was traded today.
Got it. And I know this kind of news really takes the league by storm because you just really don't expect, these things to happen. But tell me, John, I want you to talk a little bit about the Mariners as they acquired Matt Boyd from the Giants. And then the Giants, they reportedly swapped wild card players. How do you feel about a trade like this going in? And then I do want you to go in a little bit about the Minnesota Twins trade for Guardians catching prospect Sandy Leon.
Yeah, so I think when you look at the Mariners, this is a team that went into the All-Star break winning 14 games in a row. And then they came out and struggled against Houston, but really still have been really, really good over the last 25 to 30 games. This is a team that is in one of the longest playoff droughts in sports. I think it's from the early 2000s, maybe 2001 is the last time they made the playoffs, and they're trying to do everything in their power to get back. And so, this is the time where baseball teams, like we saw with the Padres with Juan Soto, like we saw with the Dodgers bringing in Joey Gallo, like we saw with the Astros bringing in a Trey Mancini and a Christian Vasquez. This is the time of year where the teams that feel like they're legitimate playoff teams and teams that feel like they can legitimately make a run, they try to add to their roster to be able to do that. And I think that's what the Mariners did with that addition, also bringing in Luis Castillo, which was probably the biggest name as far as the starting pitcher market. When you look at the Minnesota Twins, I think it's the same situation. They're in the lead of the AL Central, which hasn't been a great division this year. I think a lot of people expected the White Sox to win that. The White Sox have been disappointing, and Minnesota looks like they're going to be in the playoffs because they're going to win that division. And so it's all about how much noise can they make. Byron Buxton, one of the most talented players in baseball, has finally been able to stay healthy this year. Carlos Correa, who came over from the Astros, was the captain of those World Series teams. He's now in Minnesota, and they have a lot of good pieces. And like I said, they feel like they can make a run. So I think what you typically see at the trade deadline in baseball is the teams that feel like they aren't going anywhere. They usually sell their best players for, high-end prospects that they think, will be able to get them back to the glory days in the near future. And the teams that do feel like they're on the cusp, or the teams that do feel like they're going to make the playoffs, like I said, the Dodgers, the Astros, the Mariners, and the Twins, they come into the trade deadline saying, okay, how can we bolster our roster to make sure that we have the best chance possible to win a World Series this season? And I think you saw teams like the Mariners, Twins, Dodgers, Astros, and Padres do that at the trade deadline this year.
Gotcha. And one more, John. Now the Yankees, they get a top 15 Dodgers prospect, but they offloaded Joey Gallo to do so. Obviously, Gallo has been a massive misstep since the Yankees traded for him last year. And yet last year's deadline went for number 15, but they went for Clayton Beeter. Now Beeter's extensive medical history has dampened his value over time, but he's a decent get for a player the Yankees were simply trying to get off the books after trading Andrew Benintendi. Excuse me for botching his last name like that, John. Excuse me for that. But your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think when you look at the Yankees, they've largely had the best record in baseball this year. Aaron Judge is probably running away with the MVP at this point, although, Shohei Ohtani will always be in that conversation with the value he brings on the hitting side and the pitching side. But when you look at the Yankees, this is a team that hasn't gotten to the promised land since 2009. This is a team that expects to do it every year, and I think they've largely dominated the competition outside of Houston dominating them. And so I think they're looking ahead and saying, okay, what do we need to do to make sure that when we meet up probably inevitably with Houston in the playoffs, we're able to overcome the hump and beat them? And so I think they brought in a really good left-handed bat in Andrew Benintendi. There was a lot of controversy surrounding him because of his refusal to get vaccinated. I'm being told that he does plan to get vaccinated, and that's why the Yankees went ahead and traded for him. You know that you can't play in Toronto if you're not vaccinated, and that's a big part of the Yankees schedule, them playing 19 games against the Toronto Blue Jays because they're in their division. So I think they brought in a left-handed bat that's really good at getting on base. They got rid of Joey Gallo, who just simply did not work in New York. I'm not sure why, because I'm a Texas Rangers fan, and he was great to us. But for some reason, he could not hit as soon as he got to New York. And I think that although their starting pitching rotation was really good, of course, led by Garrett Cole earlier in the season, they started to deal with some injuries. They lost, I believe, I think it was Michael King, one of their best relievers for the year. And just the pitching hasn't been as good as it was in the beginning of the year where they were rolling. And so I think they brought in some really good reinforcements to their pitching staff. Nobody definitely going to rely on too heavily, but they definitely brought in some pitchers that can eat up some innings, keep players like Luis Severino, Jordan Montgomery, and, of course, Garrett Cole fresh and ready for the playoffs so they can throw their best stuff when it matters the most.
Lots of baseball news and content coming your way fairly soon. Again, I am joined by Jonathan Davis of Locked On Longhorns podcast. Be sure to check out my man's daily, Monday through Friday, or wherever you get your podcast content from. Before you go, John, I got to get into a little Cowboys talk with you. Obviously, one of the most exciting times of the year, even though we're in a chat and you just said baseball was a superior sport. Now, we ain't gonna get too much into that today. That's okay. But just know I'll be peeping you, bro. I'll be peeping you. But I do want to talk a little bit about the problems that Dallas may be facing. Obviously, training camp just started, and they're already, having a depleted wide receiver room issue. James Washington has gone down for what seems to be 6 to 10 weeks with a foot fracture. Is it time to sound the alarm? Is it relatively early enough for the Cowboys to be able to fix this situation, put a Band-Aid over the cut, or should we be sounding the bells and it's time to flush the season once again?
Yeah, so I think it all depends on what you have in CeeDee Lamb, right? I think that the Cowboys have pretty much made this decision that they want to go with younger players, and they're saving the cap room that they do have to be able to pay Michael Parsons, Trayvon Diggs, and CeeDee Lamb down the road. The last time that we went into a season with this much uncertainty at the wide receiver position, remember when Stephen Jones and them tried to send Dak into the season with Allen Hurns.
Wide receiver by committee.
Right? And so it's like, okay, they're going into this season with a little bit, better situation. You do have CeeDee Lamb, who is a budding superstar. You do have Noah Brown, who's been in the system for a while, who I think hasn't been utilized as well as he could have been.
And Dak's a different quarterback at this time now, too.
Yeah, and Dak is a better quarterback. You do have Dalton Schultz, who, kind of has been Dak's security blanket, and I think Tony Pollard is a player that's going to have 50-plus receptions this year, so I think that's going to help a lot out of the backfield. With that being said, I still think that you're at the point where your quarterback is young and you should be going all in, and I did not agree with getting rid of a receiver who largely made Dak a lot better in Amari Cooper. And so, like I said, you have a little bit of hope with the wide receiver core because of CeeDee Lamb. He could be a budding superstar. You have Michael Gallup coming back, who Dak has always had great rapport with. I'm not sure how fast he will come back. So I think that the Cowboys will kind of take a wait-and-see approach and see if they can survive their first couple of games, who they aren't favored to beat anyway. And so Michael Gallup can come back and see if they can go on a run then. But, I think that the Eagles are definitely making ground in the division, and I think that the one area that the Cowboys lack in, which they've always lacked in, is that this front office isn't aggressive enough to try to go out and win a championship. Like I talked about, just with baseball, look at the Padres. This is the Padres team who's consistently been beaten by the Dodgers. So what do? They say, okay, we're going to go out and get Juan Soto. You look at all of these teams in the NFL that are on the cusp. The Bills, what do? They go out and get a Von Miller.
Right.
The Cowboys have been on the cusp, and instead of going out,
they went out and got James Washington. Yeah.
And instead of selling all of their resources to try to go all in and win a championship, it seems like they're content with just being good, and I don't understand it as a Cowboys fan. So I think we have to take a wait-and-see approach on what this season will look like and what the pieces they have, how they'll perform. But I think that, once again, Dallas will fall short of their Super Bowl goal because Super Bowls are won in the offseason, and Stephen Jones and Jerry Jones haven't done what they need to do to make the Dallas Cowboys a Super Bowl team in the offseason.
Weary days in Dallas once again, John. I appreciate you for coming on to the show, man, and joining me. You always answer the call when I need you the most, and I hope to be as serviceable to you all the same. John, let everybody know where they can find you once again, my man.
Hey, once again, Locked On Horns on Twitter, Locked On Longhorns on YouTube, and wherever you get your podcast. If you're a Cowboys fan and you're worried about them not winning the Super Bowl this season, when yours and the Texas Longhorns will win the Big 12. Look,
hey, hey, no problem, y'all. Before you go out, y'all, they beating Bama this year, man.
No, they're not beating Bama.
Thank you, John, bro, man. We appreciate you, dude. We'll see you. We'll see you soon, man.
Yes, sir.
Take it easy. That was my guy, Jonathan Davis, Locked On Longhorns podcast. Hey, it's been a great show, right? Having him on for this last laugh. Obviously, talking some good Major League Baseball. A little bit about the Cowboys. Hopefully, we don't need to jump the gun just yet. There's no reason to do that. Now, I like Jalen Tolbert. Right, out of Alabama State. I think this kid can come in and do a lot of great things. Noah Brown is seasoned. Dalton Schultz seasoned. The Cowboys can do all things through Ezekiel Elliott that strengthens them. And as long as he is in the backfield, all things are okay with the Cowboys. This is Monk Spot, the Monk Spot podcast on KEI TV. Thursdays, the show. It's coming back. It's coming back. It's on its way back. That's Tony Key and Jill Alexander, my two favorite people. We're bringing you the best in contemporary jazz and news but he's going to be talking about everything that's everything in his long hiatus. But he's been on vacation and resting up, so I'm sure he's got a lot of fire for you guys. And then TNT, the Tony Connection, also happening. Returning soon on that Thursday. We'll be doing pros and cons of everything sports. So you guys will finally hear Mr. Key lose against me in the sports argument. He's been dying to do that for some reason. So I'm trying to give him an opportunity to kind of like, rescind his invitation and call it back. But it'll be awesome to hear him back on the radio waves once again. Guys, I'll be coming back at you guys again soon. I'm knocking off this rust. That's Bando Nando on the ones and twos. I'm very thankful for this guy. He had a birthday last week. Did you get crazy, man? Did you? Yeah, man. That's all I need to hear, man. I already know what that means, man. I'll see you guys next time. Tony Monk, One Spot Podcast. Thank you for tuning in.
Actually, that's spot on.
Spot on.
Everything is spot on.
Actually, that's spot on.
Spot on.